So you're probably kind of sick of hearing me talk about everything in your web page needs to be inside of a box. So I guess I won't say that anymore. But I will say that you're going to need a bunch of boxes if you wanted to create this page. Notice how I didn't say everything is inside of a box. So thank you. Thank you very much. So if you look at this layout, it's probably pretty easy for you to see where the boxes might be that you are using to position everything where you want it to be positioned, as well as give it the functionality that you would like it to have. And so this is a very simple website I did not too long ago for an artist who makes these contraptions called whirligigs, which are really cool. If you want to know more about this, you can go to petergelker.com and you can watch the documentary. But back to the subject at hand here. How are we going to build this layout?
Whatever.
Of course, it's all about planning. So what you see in front of you here is a wireframe I did for that website that you just saw. And I know I promised I wouldn't say boxes and boxes, but I'm going to say it now, so gird your loins. You'll notice this is nothing but a bunch of boxes in boxes. And that's really the key. What we're going to be creating in this video are divs or divisions, and it's really just a fancy word for a box. And we create the boxes using HTML elements and divs, but then we style those boxes using CSS. And by styling, I mean defining the size, if there are margin, if there's padding, all that kind of stuff. And so this is a basic wireframe. Now I'm going to add some overlays to this so you can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. And let's just kind of work from the outside in. So let's just look at the body element. So in the body element, I will define the body as having a margin on the left of 35 pixels and a margin on the top of 25 pixels. And then my first box I'm going to create and put in here is going to be called the content box. So this is going to be an ID div called content, and it will encompass all of these other boxes inside of it. Next to that, I'm going to have another box called Gelker. And then between those two boxes is going to be some margin. And so that margin will be 25 pixels left. So remember, when you're dealing with margin versus padding, padding is to push things in from the edge of the box. Margin is to push things away from the outside edge of the box. And so this is a case where I made the big box for content on the left. I wanted the Gelker box to be next to that big content box, but I didn't want it touching. I wanted there to be a separation. So I've created that using a margin left of 25 pixels. Now, how do these boxes end up next to each other?
I don't want to know.
Well, this is something called floating. And so we're going to float both of these boxes left so that they can exist side by side, whereas normal document flow would force that second box to be underneath. So if you're not conversant on these ideas yet, then definitely go ahead and watch the video on document flow. And I hope you appreciate what a fancy word conversant is and was. Okay, so what are we going to add next? Well, inside of this content box is going to be another box called nav. And then underneath that nav box is going to be another one called photo. So the nav element and the photo div ID are both inside of the content box. So now finally, inside of the nav box, and let me turn off the wireframe here. Inside of the nav box are a bunch of smaller boxes. And so one of them is going to be nav 60, and you'll notice that that is a class. That will give me the option of using this box more than one time. There is another series of boxes called nav 120, and there are 4 of these altogether. So this is also a class, and I will write the rule once, and it will allow me to apply it 4 times or more if I want to. And then finally, there's a box called nav 340. So again, this is a class. I'm only going to use it once within this layout, but I would have the option of using it multiple times if I wanted to. And then last but not least, I forgot to include the margin between the nav element and the photo element, so that those items will remain separated in the layout. And so this is all the same information you saw in the wireframe, and a wireframe would really be all you'd need to do before you moved on to Dreamweaver. This is just a more graphic way of giving you the same information. In here you can see some of the styling I'm going to do to these different navs. So you can see the width and the height and those margins I mentioned. So let's go ahead and get into Dreamweaver and start making our divs. In a previous video, I had already put in the content, the text and so forth, along with all the various labels that needed to be attached to the content, such as paragraph elements and spans and H1s and stuff like that. This time, however, I am going to create the rules first and then add the HTML code. Let's go ahead and start making those rules. Now, I will probably do some magical editing along the way here, so this doesn't take, 45 minutes to get all these things in here. But let's start off. We'll be slow, and then I'll speed it up as we go along. If you remember to create CSS rules, the first thing you have to do is create the source for those. And so you can import an external source, or you can create a new external source, or you can write the rules right inside the page, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to go over here to the CSS Designer window and up to Sources. I'm going to click on the little plus sign. Now the window is going to cut this off a bit, but I'm going to pull down to the bottom one, Define and Page. And you'll see that it adds the style element, the style tags, up here in the head of the code. And now I want to go down back to my CSS Designer window, and in Selectors I want to click on the plus sign. And that will allow me to either create a new selector or to search for an element. I'm going to do the body first. And so I'm just going to type in body and hit the Enter key a couple of times. It will add the selector up here in the style element. And then all I want to do in here is add margin on the left and the top. And so I'm going to scroll down in the Properties window here. And so margin at the top of 25 pixels. And then a margin on the left of 35 pixels. All right, so now those rules have been added. Now, if I look over here and I click in Design View, you'll see where my cursor is. It's not going all the way to the edge of the top. That margin is already existing in there. Now, that's because I do already have a body element in my HTML. So that is the one rule that can be applied because I have an element for it to attach to. All right, so let's move on. Next thing I want to do is make that big box, which is an ID div, called Content. So back to my selectors again, click on the plus sign, and this time I'm going to type in pound content. So remember, because it's an ID div, it has to have that pound sign or hashtag in front of it for it to be understood to be an ID selector. Okay, so I'm going to hit the Enter key, and let's start writing some rules for that.
For sure.
Okay, so width is going to be in pixels, and the width is going to be 880 pixels. The height, I am going to let the content define the height, so I'm not going to indicate that. And I am going to give this what's called a float. Now, I mentioned this earlier. If you don't attach floats to these, it'll just go into normal document flow, which is one box on top of another. So again, watch that video if you haven't covered that yet. I just want the float to be left, so I'm going to click on this little button right here. And so that will push it as far to the left as it can go. Now we've pretty much finished our content window. I'm going to go back later and add some background colors to these so you can see it better. But that's it for the rules at this point for content. Okay, let's do one more, and then I'll resort to the magic of editing to speed this up. So I'm going to click on the plus sign for selector again, and this is going to be the box to the right, that tall, skinny one. And so this one is called Gelker, so pound sign Gelker, because it's an ID. Hit the Enter key. Selector is made, and now the properties I want to give this are width in pixels of 60 pixels only. It's very skinny. I am going to give this a height, So again in pixels, and the height will be 575. Need a margin on this, just on the left though, because remember that's what's going to push the two boxes away from each other so they're not touching. And then this I would also like to float left. So this will push all the way as far to the left as it can go, but it's only going to go so far because it's going to run into the big content box. So I'm going to choose float, and there we go. So that's the rule, and so now behold the magic of editing. So I've gone ahead and finished up the CSS rules for the structure of our page, so let me just kind of walk through these with you. The body element up here, I didn't change that at all, just as we did it earlier. Content div, all I did here was add a background color so that when we put it into the layout it's easy to see. Same thing with Gelker here. Just added a background color. Otherwise, all the parameters we set earlier are the same. Okay, now here is the stuff I did without you. So the nav element, which is at the top of the page inside of the content box, and this is where all the navigation will go. So the width of this is 880, the height is 110, and then it has a margin on the bottom of 25 pixels, and that is to push the picture that's going to be underneath this down away from it, so it's not touching the nav box. And then finally, a background color there too. And then here is the box for that picture, and so the same width, 880 pixels. The height is 440 pixels, and this also has a background color. And then the bottom three here are each a class, and these are the boxes that are going to go inside of the nav element. And so nav 60 is the one on the far left. It's only 60 pixels wide. It has a height of 110, and all three of these have that same height. All three of these also float to the left, meaning they'll go inside the nav box and then push as far to the left as they can next to each other. And then finally, each one of them will have a background color. Now, if you remember the nav 60 and the nav 340, each only appear once in the layout, at least at this point. But the nav 120 will be used 4 times. There will be 4 boxes right next to each other. And so this rule is what's going to allow those to be created. So that's it. The next movie, we're going to take all of these rules and we are going to insert them into the HTML code and build our page.
Like, oh my God.